Hey, Facebook, welcome back to Deleted Scenes. Today is January 13th, and we are discussing the deadly sin of vainglory, which was the subject of the sermon yesterday. And hopefully you have listened to or watched that sermon. You can listen to it on our podcast, and you can get the sermon notes there. Or you can watch it on YouTube because we live broadcast there. And this is a follow-up conversation to that sermon. However, I know that some people encounter us first here before they see the sermon, and so right after I straighten out my webcam, I am going to give a little bit of a recap so that you know what we're talking about with vainglory. But I really suggest that you, if you haven't listened to the sermon, that you do so, because we do a lot of discussion about what vainglory is. First of all, let me remind you what we mean when we talk about the 7 deadly sins. These are not 7 terrible crimes. These are not the 7 worst things you can do. These are 7 patterns in your heart that can twist you and turn you and corrupt you and lead to sins. And they're patterns in your heart that you need to identify early and deal with, because they can twist us around into knots, and they can lead us into a lot of terrible things. In fact, in the sermon, I list some people who or some examples in the Bible of people who were driven by vainglory. The Tower of Babylon was built by vainglory. The Babylonian Empire was built by vainglory. Haman tried to commit genocide because of vainglory. It also could be argued that vainglory is the reason why Pilate had Jesus executed, based on the way Mark describes it in Mark 15:15. It was also the one of the main motivators behind the false teachers in the early church, the first people to introduce heresy into the church. And if you read the book of Revelation, it is also one of the big motivators behind Babylon the Great, which is the big enemy of God's people in the book of Revelation. And people interpret what that means different ways. But whoever you think the big enemy is in Revelation, they are motivated very much by vainglory. Check Revelation chapter 18, verse 7. So vainglory is a very powerful force for sin in the world. It occurs to me, having said all that, I have not defined vainglory in this video. Vainglory is an exaggerated desire for attention. It is when we want people to give us glory, people to give us attention, regardless of whether we actually deserve it. The word vainglory basically means you're chasing after empty glory. Glory that doesn't have any substance to it, glory that you don't deserve, or glory that is meaningless. So that could mean that you want glory for something you didn't do. Like you're not actually being a good person, but you want to be treated as if you were a good person. So your glory is empty because it's not truthful. Or it could be that you want glory for things that are not worthy of glory. This is, like I mentioned in the sermon, it's the syndrome of junior high class clowns, where I don't care if you're booing or cheering, I just want you to be paying attention to me. So I'm going to do things that provoke attention, and I'm going to glory in things that aren't actually worthy of glory, and I'm amassing all this empty glory, kind of like paper money, counterfeit money. It's not real. And this, I believe, is a huge issue in our society. And so we talked about the roots of vainglory. We talked about where it starts and where it comes from, and we talked about the destructive power of vainglory. But what we didn't talk about, that I would really like to address today, is the burden of vainglory, because vainglory is not very much fun. It is such a big mindset for us today, and yet it is also, I think, a great source of misery for people today. And you may be experiencing some anxiety, some stress, some self-hatred, some misery, and the reason is because you are stuck in vainglory. And I want you to remember, when we talk about the 7 deadly sins, if you find out that you are struggling with these sins, it doesn't mean that you are a horrible sinner who's committed a terrible crime, because the 7 deadly sins are not terrible crimes. They are patterns. That means that you have a pattern in your life that needs to be corrected, but we all struggle with them. So it doesn't make you a terrible person to say you struggle with vainglory. it's actually good that you identify it now and can deal with it ahead of time before it becomes a destructive pattern in your life. So let me talk about, there's three things that I want to draw out about glory, about the nature of vainglory, that make it a burden to the people who carry it. And the first thing is that glory is very fragile. Glory is something that is difficult to maintain, it is difficult to control, and it doesn't last very long. And so when we get caught up in vainglory, what we find is you become neurotic almost, and desperate to protect your glory and to continue to get more glory, because you have basically said, in vainglory, you have said, my worth is tied to the attention that I get. And a very similar connection that's part of that for a lot of us is I am loved if I get attention. We equate attention with love and love with value. And so we basically say, I have worth, or I am loved if I receive attention. And you can see how this is a huge thing in our society with things like reality television and social media. I don't remember where I saw this, but I think it was like a clip of Dr. Phil episode or something about this kid who was really big on Instagram, I think it was, and he had a huge following, and he was on the show because he refused to talk to his own parents anymore because they didn't have enough of a following, because he didn't want to waste his time with people who didn't have a big enough following on social media. And you get this twisted idea of where people's worth comes from. His own parents were not worthy of his time because of their following. And you have to wonder what would happen to him and his self-image if he were to lose his following, because he views everyone's worth based on their social media following. And the thing about social media following and any kind of glory like that, it's very fleeting. There's a famous story that when a Roman general, whenever in the Roman Empire, when a Roman general would do something amazing, he would be given a parade called a triumph, and it was the biggest honor you could get. And it was a big parade through Rome, and he would ride in a chariot, and they would have one of his slaves stand behind him on the chariot and hold a golden crown over his head and whisper in his ear, "Glory is fleeting," to remind the general of this fact that that glory doesn't last very long. And if you put all of your worth into being the latest, greatest thing, it doesn't take very long for you to lose that worth. Think of celebrities or musicians who are starting to lose relevance, and they become desperate to get attention. They become desperate to be current again. They're desperate to get back on top, because it doesn't matter that they used to be famous. They need to be famous now, because past glory doesn't satisfy anymore. And so you get into this absurd rat race. So it doesn't matter how many followers on Twitter you had 2 years ago. It matters how many followers on Twitter you have now. And so you become very desperate to do anything to get attention, to keep your glory going, because it's continually falling away. It has a very quick expiration date. And so the first thing is glory is fragile, and it means that we get into this neurotic mindset of continually having to do things to get people's attention. If you get addicted to your cell phone, and then they've shown that people get endorphin hits from dings on their phone, and notifications that someone's reacted to them on social media. And if you go for a day without getting enough dings, you start to freak out, that anxiety. Do people love me? Do people care about me? What's going on? And that's just a tough way to live. The second thing about vainglory is that vainglory is very isolating, because here's the thing: in order to maintain vainglory, in order to maintain your image, you have to emphasize your qualities, you have to emphasize the good things about yourself, but you have to hide the bad things about yourself, or you have to hide your limitations or your mistakes or your pain. And so what ends up happening is we have to create a facade. We have to hide who we really are in order to protect ourselves and in order to maintain our competition. And we end up isolating ourselves. We live in a very lonely society. My generation is one of the loneliest in history. And this is an increasing phenomenon. And the strange thing is, I can talk to any member of my family any time of day or night, no matter where they are in the country. That is ridiculous, the amount of contact I can have with people and the amount of attention and yet I am part of the loneliest generation. Why? Because even though we can see each other and talk to each other, we can't be vulnerable with each other. And so we end up being very lonely because we can't actually show our true selves to people, because we're actually in a competition. We're trying to make ourselves look as good as possible, because my worth ends up coming from how good I can make people think I am. And so we end up being very isolated and very lonely and very cut off from people. The last thing about vainglory is that vainglory is very unforgiving. When we make I think one of the reasons why vainglory is tempting to us is because it gives us almost a semi-objective way to measure our worth. I don't have to trust that other people like me if I can use my number of Twitter followers to calculate my worth. If I can have something objective, something measurable, then I can measure my worth. The problem is, once we fall into vainglory, we are tied to those measurements, and that means that it's equally objective when I become unpopular, when I lose glory, when I lose all those Twitter followers. If I become a social media influencer and my reputation is based on my following on YouTube, and then you've seen YouTube stars and social media stars who have a fall from grace because there's one guy who went and filmed some highly irreverent, disrespectful video in a forest in Japan where people commit suicide, where tons of people commit suicide, and he went and was joking around in there, and tons of people were offended, and he became a pariah. Everybody turned on him, and unfortunately, that means that this person who lived their life by getting value from attention now has lost value, has lost attention, and is just but the measurement they have chosen to assign themselves worth measures them as worthless. It's not to say that I'm not accusing this person of being worthless, but what I'm saying is that he has tied his worth to the attention that he gets, and then he did something that brought him negative attention, and that means that his stock is going down. And that is a tough place to be. And you will see people be absolutely devastated by the fact that they played the glory game and lost. And that there's so much heartache that comes in playing the vainglory game because we can't ultimately control it. And we tie our worth to something that isn't actually true. It's empty. And so vainglory is a very difficult game to play and causes us so much pain and anxiety. And if you have found yourself feeling desperately lonely because nobody knows who you are, nobody knows the real you, and you're certain that if they knew the real you, they wouldn't love you, that can be a symptom of vainglory. If you just struggle with that loneliness, if you struggle with the rat race of keeping up appearances, you're struggling with vainglory, and you don't have to. You can pursue a different kind of value that has nothing to do with your image, but has to do with the value that your Father has put on you in heaven. So what I want to do now is I want to pivot into part of the handout that I did not get to. These are our sermon notes. And you can, if you weren't at the service and you didn't get the bulletin, you can print this off from our, go to turnerchristianchurch.com, go to the sermons page, and for each sermon you'll see a PDF document, and you can print this off. Inside are the discussion questions for our small groups. This is an earlier draft, so it doesn't have those discussion questions yet, but on a normal one, it would be there. And then finally, on the back, you will see this devotion that is meant to guide you through ways to confront vainglory. And we talked about the list of examples of vainglory. Today, what I want to talk about is there's a list of 3 remedies, 3 practices that you can work on, 3 disciplines that can help you to combat vainglory. So, number 1, the first practice is silence. And here's what silence means. In vainglory, we are continually consumed with the need to defend and praise ourselves, the need to talk and explain ourselves to other people, so that we can spin our own behaviors and our own and the facts of our lives to make ourselves look good. So a person who is vainglorious, I struggle with this. You know, if somebody has a bad impression of me, I have just this burning need to explain myself, to defend myself, and to make sure that they know the truth. Well, if the truth is flattering to me. If it's not, then I want them to know my version of the truth. And so one of the ways that you can work on your vainglory and force yourself to focus on substance over image is to practice silence, by which I mean don't defend yourself, or don't watch the way you speak, and keep yourself from continually promoting yourself and complimenting yourself and playing up how successful you are and that kind of thing, and basically focus on establishing your image through your actions rather than your words. So if you want people to think that you are a kind and compassionate person, then focus on behaving in kind and compassionate ways, and force yourself not to try and argue that you are that kind of person, but focus on letting your deeds speak for yourself. Because presuming that you are trying to be a godly person, then by focusing on proving that by your deeds rather than your words, you will be focusing on your substance rather than your image. The second remedy that is on here is solitude. It means spending time alone, away from the crowd and away from the conversation, away from the spin. And for a lot of us, this would mean taking a fast from social media. Maybe turning your phone off for a few days or something like that. And basically the idea here is that when you are caught up in vainglory, your worth depends on what people are saying about you. And so you continually need to check in on what people are saying about you. And so before smartphones, that would mean you would constantly be spending time with people and constantly checking in with people and need to know everything that's going on and what everybody's saying about you. In nowadays, it means constantly checking your phone, as a discipline, solitude means spending time away from the conversation, away from all of that, and just spending some time with God. Because ultimately, pivoting from vainglory to humility means focusing on pleasing God rather than pleasing other people. The last one is worship. Worship is a very powerful tool to combat vainglory, because basically worship at its core is praising God for the things that he does. And so if you are going to worship, and if you're truly doing it properly, then you are spending time focusing on what God has done and the glory that God deserves. Now, here's the interesting thing. Very often, public worship, is one of the places where we are most tempted by vainglory. How many of us, when we're singing, I know this is something that I struggle with. When I'm worshiping, I'm thinking, how do I sound? Am I singing, am I singing too loud or not loud enough? At any time I sing harmony, I'm not sure whether I'm doing it because I enjoy it, or because I like to try and make the song sound good, or because I want to get attention for knowing how to harmonize. There's things like that where worship, just like the Pharisees in the Sermon on the Mount, worship is one of those things where, because we're in public, we are sometimes tempted to do it in order to get attention from other people. And so worshiping in private it can be a very helpful tool for changing our mindset, because there's no one to see you, there's no one to be impressed by your singing or to not be impressed by it. And you just spend time worshiping God, meaning that you are focusing on drawing attention to what is great about him rather than what is great about yourself. Because ultimately, God is the one who deserves the credit for everything that is good in this world. And everything that is good about me, I can't really take ultimate credit for it. God is the one who deserves ultimate credit. I'm not actually in control of the fact that I was born in America, that I was born with all these privileges, whatever abilities I may have. I didn't choose them. If I worked for the things I have, or the abilities that I have, I didn't give myself my work ethic. I didn't give myself my ability. And ultimately, I can't really take credit for everything. And so when I do get caught up in vainglory, I'm actually stealing glory from God in a way. And so giving glory to God where it belongs is a way of helping us refocus and to get away from this mindset that I am the center of the universe and everything is about me. So I hope that that's helpful for you to kind of get a picture of how difficult a vainglorious life can be, because very often we will look at people who are very popular, we'll look at celebrities and think, oh man, how great must it be to be them? How great must it be to be universally adored and to be loved? And in reality, that is a huge burden to bear. And the happiest person in the world would not be the person who is the most popular or the biggest celebrity, but it would rather be the person who had the best understanding of their worth before God. Because we struggle to believe that God loves us in our corruption and in our imperfections. And the happiest we could be would be to know who we are in God, because God doesn't change. The crowd changes. Your Twitter following changes. And it's just exhausting and heartbreaking to chase your worth that way. But when you find your worth in God, you get out of that rat race and you can truly find stability and peace. So I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions about vainglory, feel free to put them in the comments or to message us at the church or on the Facebook page. If you're local, we'd love to see you in church again this coming week when we're going to be talking about greed. And then you'll see another live broadcast next week as a follow-up to our discussion on greed. Oh, one last little factoid, something that I meant to mention in the sermon and I didn't. For each of these sermons on the 7 deadly sins, there's a picture of an individual, and those pictures are from real historical outlaws from the West. And so vainglory, for no particular reason except the picture seemed to fit, I chose an image of a man named Ike Clanton, who was one of the leaders of the cowboy gang that fought Wyatt Earp in the gunfight at the OK Corral. So, fun fact, when you look at the cover for this sermon, that is Ike Clanton of the cowboy gang. And next week we'll be looking at, there'll be another picture of another, I think also a cowboy. Anyway, you'll see. This is just me geeking out over cowboys. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'd love to see you at church on Sunday. God bless.